Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Wendigo encounter horror stories. First story, The Moose Man, Wendigo. This is a true story of an experience I had as a child with what I knew at the time as the Moose Man, but which I now suspect was a Wendigo. I have told several of my close friends about this, and I think back to it often, wanted to write it down. When I was a child, my family would go to my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. I was one of the youngest of our cousins, of which there is a large group. My grandmother had a secluded home, backed up to expansive woods. Her house was adorned with Native American artwork and artifacts. My cousins and I would go off and explore the woods behind her house together, walking atop old rock walls and playing with the frogs in nearby ponds. The air was sweet and thick back there. The area was historically home to a large Native American population, and there were some interesting features in the woods evidencing that history, including an abandoned sweat lodge covered in animal hides, which I was always too afraid to explore, and old stone arrowheads in the dirt. One Thanksgiving, one of my older cousins and I paired off from a larger group when we were back in the woods, seeking to explore further into the woods than we had ever gone. We walked about 15 minutes or so through a fairly thick, unfamiliar portion of the woods when we arrived at the top of a large rock outcropping at the edge of a steep embankment. The hair on my arm still stands up thinking about this, and it is right now as I write this, but I saw a tall humanoid figure in ragged clothes at the bottom of the embankment, about 30 to 40 feet down, facing away from me and my cousin. I was curious but wary, wondering if the figure were a dummy or maybe someone that was injured and needed our help. I considered calling out, but saw the figure move slightly, and suddenly I was full of fear. Without making a sound, I tapped my cousin and signaled for him to look down at the figure. We looked back up at each other. I was hoping for a sense of reassurance, but I could see a dread in his eyes that shot down my spine. When we looked back down at the figure, it turned towards us. This tall, lanky, ragged humanoid figure had the face of a moose, and it was looking dead at me. We locked eyes, and I can't explain why, but I knew that it wanted to eat me. We didn't wait, we didn't even scream. My cousin and I ran away as fast as we could possibly run, back the same way that we came. As I ran, I could feel that we were being pursued, and I was younger and a step slower than my cousin. The air grew thicker and hazier, and the woods changed around us. All of a sudden, my cousin and I came into a clearing in the woods that did not exist when we had passed through originally. The air there was particularly thick, almost green, with fireflies floating around. The ground in the clearing was marked with circles of mushrooms, fairy rings. It was very disorienting, and it felt like the clearing was luring me to stay forever. All of a sudden, I heard my mom call out to me through the woods. She, along with some of my uncles and aunts, came to look for me and my cousin. We were the last two in the woods, and it was getting darker. It was time to sit for Thanksgiving dinner. Her call pierced through the fog of this experience, breaking whatever curse was on me and my cousin, allowing us to escape. My cousin and I told the others what we had seen, that we had been pursued by a moose man who that wanted to eat us, but obviously nobody believed us. I probably wouldn't have believed my own senses either, if not for what happened next. After dinner, all of the kids went back outside to play in the yard, running behind sheds and cutting in and out of the woods at the edge of the yard, evading and capturing each other in a game called Manhunt. I was still afraid from before, but took comfort in numbers and proximity to the house. As a large group of us were trying to locate the last of the fugitives, one of my cousins shone a big flashlight into the woods. There, our whole group saw one of our fugitive cousins in a bush, and standing right behind him, a tall, ragged humanoid figure with the head of a moose towering over the bush. We all screamed and sprinted back inside. That was the end of the games that day. Sometimes I bring up this event with my cousins to see if they still remember. They do remember, but they hate to talk about it. Second story, a witch has haunted me since my existence. Let me start this by saying I don't exactly remember these encounters clearly, and some are merely from what my mother told me of my behavior as a baby and then a toddler. I'll give you a brief background. Maybe it will help discern why or what is exactly going on with me, because I have no fucking clue. My experiences start when I was around 2 or 3, really just beginning to communicate and understand the world around me. My mom would find me babbling in my room by myself, which is normal for a toddler that age. Try to imitate conversations you see and hear take place between your parents, etc. She realized, however, that something was wrong when I started wandering places I'd never gone before and appeared to be holding a hand that wasn't there and babbling again in rooms by myself. The basement, which had one of those heavy doors that if you don't get out of the way fast enough, it closes on your legs. Many times I managed to go down to the basement, apparently closing the door behind me. I went into the bathroom, again closing the door behind me, constantly babbling and interacting with something or someone who wasn't there. These are all stories I've heard from my mother. Now, let me delve into more intimate tales of my own. I started dreaming and having nightmares around 4 or 5, and since then my mind has been very vivid during sleep and shows no signs of slowing down. At first it started with regular dreams, occurrences during the day, silly things I wished for as a young child. Then began the nightmares. It started with the very image of a witch-looking lady. Looking back now, I'd say she was roughly 7 feet, or a modest 6 feet 8 inches, or 6 feet 9 inches. Long flowing dress down to her toes, which she didn't seem to have, or feet period. Just to the bottom of her, wherever she ended. She wore a tiara that appeared to be constructed of crude silver. Sometimes she held a stick in her hand, which now I assume was a staff or a wand of some kind. It's hard to make sense of any of this really. Sometimes she was unarmed, had nothing in her possession. What I can make sense of is this. She meant me foul harm. She would start chanting things in a profound language I still can't relate anything to. Archaic, perhaps? Even that is a stretch. After the chanting, I'd wake up screaming and crying, and occasionally I'd have peed myself. Then it moved from chanting. The nightmares became more realistic, taking place in my home rather than just my mind in empty darkness. To be more specific, this is the first time I've seen her full figure. What I'm about to describe is my worst encounter with her during that age. Let me begin by placing the setting. Whenever I went to sleep, my parents were playing games on their computers, sitting next to each other. I think this was EverQuest at the time. My grandmother rested in her room, in deep sleep with her snores that seemed to move the very foundation of our home. I have fallen asleep on the couch behind my parents, seemingly too tired to continue watching TV. She floated very slowly from my grandmother's room. Every moment she moved closer to me, her cold, lifeless eyes somehow still set on me. Yet they didn't move or show any light. They just pierced right through me until they began to hurt me physically. By the time she entered the kitchen, which is next to my grandma's room, and now in between me and her, I began screaming, blood-curdling screams. I used to live in Chicago, and I was witness to my uncle's father's death, which fortunately I can't remember. I think my subconscious stole the memory from me, so I couldn't feel the pain. I can still remember his scream whenever the first bullet impacted, and my screams were eerily similar. I truly thought she was going to end me, right then and there, and secretly I wish she did. She reached the end of the couch, my throat raw. I never stopped screaming even after the realization nobody could hear me. They were just full of raw intensity and fear. She gripped my head in her cold, bony hands before I woke in a sweat, screaming and sobbing. This same interaction happened numerous times, but not to this severity. This was the peak. Most times she never made it to me to touch me before I woke up. I'd wake up when she was in the kitchen or the moment she got close to the couch. Let's move forward now. I'm 12 and living with a different father, same mother, different house and place. Not to go into details, but my real father is not a good person and is dying of cystic fibrosis. And as much as I hate him, I wish nobody that kind of pain. At this time, we're living in a trailer house with around 1,800 SQ units, an average size for trailers. My room is what used to be a storage closet for my father now, but it has been renovated to accommodate a bed and my dresser. After all this time has passed, I've had no interactions with the witch, and I've gained a much better lifestyle. A year goes by after moving into this new place, new environment, and she starts haunting me again. This time she moved on from my dreams and into reality. I began feeling tugs on my clothing, feeling like I'm being pulled to go somewhere, and eventually I always got the feeling to look under my bed, but never had the courage. I never mentioned the way I felt with the fear of being dismissed as, "That's nonsense, just go to bed." Playing shenanigans to stay awake longer, get attention, get something out of my parents. A few months later, I would get a very cold feeling around my feet. If you have ever had to soak your feet in ice water, you'll understand the feeling. And then I would get yanked halfway out of bed. When I say halfway out of bed, I mean to say that I fell to my knees at the end of my bed after being yanked over my frame and had a fight to not go under. I've done my research, and many people are haunted by a witch or witches, sometimes in the form of a male warlock. Some have different experiences entirely. I've read of some people getting yanked under the beds. I posed the question of why. What do they seek from us? Are we picked from a young age to be tormented? I don't necessarily believe in past lives, but I theorize that if each of us truly does have one, perhaps our past self is to blame. I'm no longer haunted by her per se, but I still feel her presence. I'm stronger now, going on 20, and I have faith in myself spiritually, and because of my experiences with her, I've gone out of my way with researching and learning ways to defend myself from malignant spirits like herself. If anyone has any questions on how to do the same, I feel geared enough to help you effectively without misguiding you. If anybody can provide and reasoning behind her haunting, I'm still trying to reason it myself. Third story. I'm a witch, and I found something in the woods. I'm a witch. While that may sound far-fetched, it is true. I've always at least somewhat believed in the supernatural. Call it instinct, call it superstition, or call it naivety. No matter what, I can work with magic and spirits well enough. I live in Colorado, near the mountains. While we all know that the Appalachian Mountains are scary, most people don't realize the horror of their younger cousins. They are young, and they lack any of the ancient life of their elders, but their horrors are far less known. But I'm getting sidetracked. Let's get into the meat of the story. I woke up at about 6 in the morning on the Saturday when this began. I was on a head in the mountain forest at that time, so I was preparing accordingly. I put on my favorite old hunting boots, a warded flannel jacket, and I wore a belt with an abundance of pouches. I put my ritual knife, a crescent-shaped blade with a bone handle and several spells on it, in its sheath, and slung my rifle over my shoulder before heading out. After all, I know better than to assume the woods are safe. The 20-minute drive to my little dead end of a dirt road was calm, if only the whole trip was like that. In the early morning chill, I trudged uphill to a brilliant purple and blue clearing of wildflowers where I crouched down and started cutting some columbines by the stem, the morning dew fresh upon my skin. Calmly, I started to cut through my next set of flowers, some larkspurs which were flourishing, their harvesting accompanied by the song of birds. Thus I stepped to my final harvest. I cut some bluebells by the stem and started placing them in a pouch. As I was crouched by them, I heard a twig break. I snapped my head up and held my knife in front of me, but there was nothing there. I assumed it was just some animal, but that was my first mistake. I walked onward towards my next destination, a small stream a mile or so away. I walked through, and my eyes watched for familiar landmarks, an oddly bent tree here, a dilapidated wooden structure there. But as often as there were familiar landmarks, there were unfamiliar things. A tree had some fresh damage, which might have been claw marks. A little fox den a few meters away from my path collapsed, and a mutilated corpse. That was something else I should have noted. I approached the corpse only to see what appeared to be some sort of deer. I've never really been disturbed by death or gore, so I felt it would be worth it to take this animal corpse, which had clearly fallen upon a trap or got a stray buckshot striking it or something. After all, it would be a waste to just leave it behind. So I got to work, blood pouring into a preset jar, meat squelching as I skinned the creature. As I methodically skinned the creature, I met its glassy eyes, There was no life in them, but there was something there. In the reflection of the eyes, I saw something rush between two trees. On instinct, I grabbed my .22 rifle. It wouldn't do much, but it could scare off a threat, and I started poking around, my bloody knife resting in its sheath. But nothing was there, not just no animal, but nothing. It was dead silent. There was only my breath and the sound of my fingernail tapping against the gun's barrel. I mumbled a quiet prayer. Lady Artemis, mistress of the hunt and the wilds, please grant me safety in this wood. And another, I call upon the green, grant me safe passage and forage. And several other prayers. I wasn't actually scared then, but I wish I had been. Maybe things would be different then. As my search yielded no results, I returned to the carcass and continued harvesting, the empty eye sockets peering into me. As I finished harvesting the corpse, it was midday, and I had used a small tarp I kept in one of my larger bags to carry it over my shoulder as a rucksack I carried onto the stream. As I walked, the forest returned to life, and the hairs on the back of my neck that I didn't even know were raised settled down. I quickly checked my phone as I arrived at the creek. It was 12:20, and there was no hint of any need to return home. I filled some jars with water from the stream and started walking upstream to see if anything else I wanted was around. I saw a few golden chanterelles I harvested and also some fly amanitas I avoided. But for the next hour or so, there was nothing else of note. No silence or stalking creatures or odd landmark. But that was before I saw the circle. It was on top of a mostly flat boulder. Faded chalk marks made a circle around a core carving, which looked like a spiral with some sort of runes around it. The carving was caked in a red-brown substance. As I stood by the circle, the air fell off. The gentle breeze stilled, and the animals grew silent. This place caught my interest. I scribbled the symbols down in a notebook, a set of 5 lines pointing away from another line, a branching line which resembled a tree, something that seemed to be a lightning bolt, and a set of curved lines sticking together. I resolved to try and figure out this weird spot. Another foolish mistake. It took several hours to copy it all down, and the sky was dark with clouds. I could smell the rain coming. I had to get home soon. After all, I was just barely 16 and got my license barely a month ago. So I rushed down the mountainside with far less caution. I ran past the dilapidated building and the weird tree and the dilapidated building. When I noticed the building for the second time, I realized something was off. How'd I get turned around in a place I have roamed for since I was 12 and got my first knife? And as I paused, I noticed something in the trees. There was a flash of something in between the trees. So again, I grabbed my rifle and moved to inspect the area with some muttered prayers. There was again no life, but there were some odd symbols on the trees. Forgetting my circumstances, I copied them down. But I then remembered my circumstances and slashed through the symbols with my enchanted ritual knife. Then I turned and continued hurrying downhill. Now I got through the flowers and reached my car, a beat-up little pickup truck. I quickly placed the deer harvest in the back and tied it down and slipped into the driver's seat. As I closed the door, I noticed something. It was hidden between a tree, but I saw its arm. It clearly bent with at least 2 joints before it slipped into the dark, and its 6 bloody clawed hand held 2 glassy dark eyes. I never was one to run. I punched my bully when he was twice my weight as a little girl. I drew a knife on the creep who was following me when I was 12. I pointed my .22 rifle at the mountain lion that nearly pounced on me during my first hunting trip. And I stood my ground against the spirit which entered my home and terrorized me and my siblings. But this thing was different. I felt my instinct to fight overwhelmed. It was something greater than me. It was powerful, and I was just some squirrel or mouse. I tore out of the little dead end fast enough that I nearly shot off of the road when I came on a turn. By the time I got on a road where I may have interacted with another driver, my fear had settled. Instead of rushing away, I focused on every little detail around me. I scanned for any marking or movement. I analyzed every landmark possible. But now as I saw my phone tell me it was 1900 hours I was in town. As I pulled into my driveway and started unloading my loot, I saw something on the side of the trunk. The IT was a set of 6 scrapes. I rushed to store my loot and then grabbed some chalk from my magical workspace. I scribbled down a pentacle and some protective sigils at the doors and windows. I started to make some spell bottles when my mother caught notice of my erratic behavior. "Dear, what happened?" she asked. She was well aware that I didn't react like this normally. When I didn't respond, she continued, "It's okay, dear, what's going on?" "Mom, I have to set up some protections for the house. Something might have followed me." I answered as I placed some iron nails and my blood in a jar and murmured some protective charms before moving on to the next. I spoke up, "Tell the others that this is a ghost thing and to stay put." My mother, unsurprisingly, did not take my orders and instead asked a question. "What do you mean by ghost thing?" As I made my last spell bottle, I answered, "I know you don't believe, but there is some sort of spirit which was causing me issues." I quickly ran past her into our yard and buried one bottle in each corner of the property and ran back inside. I then heard my siblings scamper out of their rooms. My older sister, Erin, looked at my disheveled state. She quickly grabbed her own hunting knife and rifle before returning and speaking. "So, Amy, what's happening?" My younger brother, Jacob, spoke up this time. "Sis, what's happening? I'm scared." Following this, my little sister, Elizabeth, spoke up. "Yeah, is it another ghost? This time I'll fight it." I was pretty confident before this, but now it was a bit more serious. I breathed before speaking. "You all should be fine. Remember the charms I made you?" I began, getting a series of nods. "You should be fine if you have them with you. And Liz, you're too young to fight this one." This seemed to satisfy my younger siblings, and they went back to their room. But Erin stood firm. "I don't know anything about magic, but this is serious, isn't it?" Erin said, "Our mother decided to give us some tea, and I heard our father settle down next to us in a chair. I took my tea as I spoke before the older family members. So I get that you all are probably more concerned, so I'll tell you the important stuff. Essentially, there is a spirit or monster in the woods which was stalking me, and it scratched my truck, and I don't want to risk you all." My family was not satisfied with that, but I didn't give any more information. Throughout the following week of school, and me trying to figure out the magical nonsense, I've been seeing things, the claw marks, the five-fingered sigil, and the other sigils. While I have done my due diligence in destroying them, I need to solve this. This Saturday, I will go into the woods and seal that thing, no matter what. Fourth story, a man of myth and legend. I was a Roman, finding myself far from the great empire I'd been born into. I lived in an abundantly small coastal village, in a stone brick home possessing a straw roof for elemental protection. I'd moved out of necessity with my family, who sought a different life away from the empire, as not all of them were of Roman descent. The hamlet was filled with superstitious folk who weaved massive tales to compensate for the town's size. There were many stories I held in memory, some smaller and less peculiar than others, but one that stood out further than the rest had been the story of a mythical mercenary, one known only by the title of Veiled Serpent. There were many known mercenaries, most of whom would get a job done if the price was right, but the Veiled Serpent operated differently. According to legend, he was born amongst cannibalistic bandits and spent his life with the wrong crowd. In his adolescence, he'd been taken in as an apprentice by a vicious warlord who taught him quick-paced animalistic combat. Those unlucky few to experience the brunt of his training faced vicious wounds, if not death, the likes of which included deep infectious bites, broken or removed limbs, stolen organs, missing scalps, and a vile assortment of brain damage. During the brink of manhood, the Veiled Serpent had gained widespread fame and had often been recruited by governmental higher-ups to perform political assassinations. However, the Veiled Serpent's past had never been buried or forgotten, and he also took on jobs from the likes of villainous criminals. He would kidnap children and virgins for hag-like witches, kill and deliver the bodies of families to starving cannibals, and wipe out entire villages in the dead of night, leaving nothing but blood and ash for dawn to find. There were many more unspeakable acts, all attributing credit to the Veiled Serpent. In all my time living amongst the hamlet, none of the stories I'd known had ever come true. None seemed believable, even that of the veiled serpent. Today, I found myself laboring for countless hours tending to my growing crops. I'd worked until night fell, and just as I'd finished my task to personal satisfaction, I heard a soft thud that whistled through the air until its impact. I frantically searched for the source of the noise until it made itself blatantly apparent, and the straw roof of my home blazed by way of an ignited arrow. A sense of survival made itself immediately apparent, and I ran in the opposite direction, the rhythmic noise of more thudding arrows against the hamlet's untouched buildings following close behind. I hid along the town's forested border, staying cowered amongst the greenery. Citizens swarmed from their homes, some licked by the flames, and others running to the docks, or towards the forest by way of paved paths. Those who attempted to find refuge in the forest were met by a figure who I couldn't yet fully see through the plumes of smoke. I heard a vicious scream from those the figure found, followed swiftly by the sound of slicing flesh or heavy impact. Soon, all the townsfolk attempted to escape by way of the docks, but the man caught up to them. I saw him between the buildings, walking slowly towards whoever was to be his next victim. He wore a tattered black cloak, heavily coated in both dried and fresh blood. His hands were colored with ash, and he bore the top half of a deer's skull as a mask. He was decorated spectacularly in the bones of animals and humans. A cloth around his waist hung countless finger bones. His exposed chest was covered in a cacophony of scars and bone amulets. When he would fight, his method was fluid, almost like a vicious leaping dance. As soon as he caught sight of another victim, he rushed for them, slicing them open with one blow upon contact and decapitating them with the next. He took bites from their open neck wound before heading to the dock. A few boats had already departed, but after slaughtering everyone who hadn't yet boarded, he sent out more ignited arrows to sink them. When he entered the water, heading for those few overboard survivors, I took it as my only chance to run. I disappeared into the forest, equally thankful and terrified that I'd survived, for I knew now he would actively hunt me and any other potential survivors. Fifth story, the Wendigo story. I'm not entirely sure if this was a Wendigo or what I just usually refer to this as that, since this took place not far from an Indian reservation in upstate New York. A few years ago, 2012 or 2013, I think, since I was still in high school then, I was at a party with some friends, and as the night goes on, maybe 11 to 12 at night, one of my friends and I go outside to have a cigarette. The second we get outside, there's just this completely awful, foul smell, like just blood, vomit, piss, and death all at once. Now, this was somewhat the middle of nowhere, so we just figured it was a dead animal and went on with having that cigarette. Less than a minute later, we hear something moving in the dark, and sure enough, a deer comes hobbling into the very edge of the porch light. So we just mention, how cute, and the like. But then I noticed something. One of its front legs was messed up in some way. And I'm talking like broken in multiple places, messed up. So my friend and I are slightly off put by this, less than we should have been since drunk, and finish up our cig and go to head inside. However, right as we start to do that, one of the two porch lights goes pop and goes out. So now it's less light outside, and this deer is back into the darkness. So, a bit giddily, we both do this like fake scared squeal at each other and turn around to go inside. And that's when we heard it. That undeniable sound of nails on the concrete patio. We both slowly turn around to see this hunched over, rotten coyote doing this very slow, very unnatural crawl towards us. We go from 0, 600 paralyzed with fear almost instantly until another one of our friends playfully pulls us through the open door, telling us to get back to the party. To this day, I have not experienced anything like that, and it's one of the most horrifying things I've ever experienced. Sixth story, my local Wendigo. Well, after all my years of supernatural encounters, I am finally making a Reddit account to post my stories. This is my most recent Wendigo encounter in DeWitt County, Texas. January 12th, 2019, around 8 p.m. Now I'm going to be honest. I chose to go out on this particular night because my town was having a little ghost tour at the haunted hospital. I was lonely and wanted to at least see others having fun. It was 8 p.m. when I left the house and planned to be back within an hour. I have a routine of circling my town in the evening because I just like patrolling, and there's always things creeping about after nightfall. I made my way to the haunted hospital, and once I got there, I saw flashlights inside the windows and heard laughter. That's nice, I thought. Seeing others have fun made me smile and got rid of some of the loneliness I was feeling. This was the halfway point of my walk, and I started my second half heading home now. There are some woods on the opposite side of town now, but nothing impressive until I got to the last quarter of my walk. Now, I was passing the baseball field on my left with a large wheat field on my right. This wheat field used to be a large extension of the woods, but was cleared out for growing wheat. I continued again and crossed the small bridge that went over a creek and past another section of woods. I was now headed towards an old metal building that has recently been turned into a place for making gates and fences. It was about 9 p.m. now. This building had two small white houses beside it and a stretch of dirt road wrapping around the backside of it before returning to normal asphalt road. Now at night, this place seems pretty scary, but this was one of my favorite places to hang out at night and is a normal path I take my walks through. As I was coming up to the dirt road, I saw a very tall 8 to 10 foot pale figure with lanky arms almost dragging the ground. About 40 feet ahead of me briskly walked from the white houses to the woods. I stopped walking. What was that, I thought? Its size confused me so much that I had forgotten my previous encounters with a smaller version of it. After a few minutes of standing there, I convinced myself to continue walking forward. I was an adventurous person, and there's no way I was just going to turn tail and go home when I just saw something so odd and out of place. Not even 15 seconds into walking forward, this sudden heavy sense of dread overcame me like a giant weight crashing down on my shoulders. My instincts were telling me something was really, really wrong. I turned my iPhone light on and shined it at the woods. Nothing. I kept walking while keeping my head on a swivel, looking in all directions to keep my surroundings in check. About the 5th or 6th time I looked at the woods, I saw it. A huge, bleached, white humanoid figure crouched on all fours. It was easily still 5 to 6 feet tall, even though it was bent over. Its black eyes paralyzed me. It had a big round bald head and an extremely emaciated body, void of all hair, with very long, almost dislocated-looking arms and legs. Its legs were like a flamingo bird's at the knee as it bent backwards instead of forward. I took all this in a matter of seconds. Suddenly, it reminded me of a praying mantis when it swayed back and forth while staring as if deciding whether to attack or not. This broke me out of my trance, and I ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back until I had ran a block. Out of breath and scared as heck, I finally took a glance back. I didn't see anything in sight. I didn't hear it chase me either. Maybe it was just stalking those people in those two little white houses and was waiting for me to go away to go back to its business. Maybe it didn't want anything to do with me. But that wasn't the end. I got home, took a shower, and turned out the lights before I hopped in bed when suddenly there was something tapping on my window. Tap, tap, tap. 3 taps and nothing else. I laid in my bed that night, wondering whether it had followed me home or not. A string of bad luck ensued afterwards the following weeks. I was constantly burning stuff on the stove that was relatively easy to make, and I was an excellent cook on top of that. My dog started going nuts at night, growling and barking at night in the living room and at the front door, which she has never ever done, as she is the quietest, sweetest dog you'll ever meet. And finally, I got deathly sick for 3 weeks straight with no sure sign of what I'd gotten. 103 fever, vomiting with blood, diarrhea with blood, sneezing, coughing, sore throat, migraines, nerve spasms, stuffy and dry nose. It changed constantly. Severe stomach aches, aching all over, really especially in my bones. Other lesser entities taking advantage of my state, trying to latch onto me, and slight insomnia. I've had smaller strings of bad luck before, after hearing its mimicry trying to lure me into the forest, or seeing it one other time, but I didn't see any details, but nothing ever this extreme. I don't go into the woods alone anymore. Sorry it's been so long, guys. After talking to people who know about and study this type of thing, we've come to the solution. It may have been a forest giant, a subcategory of fairy or fae. They have many names, and they are not what you expect. I also came to the conclusion there may have been a small one living my house for years. It has been gone for a good while now, though. Seventh story. Into the Cave of Witches. I don't believe in witches, but that they're real, they're real. This is a phrase I often heard said when I was a child growing up in the north of Chile, a long and narrow country in the southernmost area of the American continent. A magical land with unforgiving desert at the north, dark and impenetrable forests in the south, and enormous icy blue glacials reaching the south end of the world. The north of Chile, where I grew up, is a desert area where the soil itself is filled with chemicals such as peroxide that kill anything trying to grow in it. But these same sterile soils are filled with riches in minerals, especially silver and copper. And because of this wealth in mineral resources, there's been a mining industry in the area since late 19th century, even before big cities and the resources needed for them arrived to those areas. The north of Chile is filled with ancient legends and mysteries. People are often lost in the desert and never found, or return several years later looking just as they did when they disappeared, still believing it is the very day when they went missing. Strange voices of centuries-old battles are still heard. Terrifying creatures roam the dunes. And, of course, beings not from this world are often seen by people working in the copper mining operations. But those are all stories for another time. Before these mysteries populated the minds of the local folklore and superstition, people already spoke of witches and their infernal Black Sabbath, where they would commune with darkness incarnate and surrender themselves to the most wicked of perversions the human mind can conceive: child sexual abuse, torture, cannibalism, animal and human sacrifice, etc. In Chile, when someone speaks of witches, it is a neutral pronoun, for there are female as well as male witches, both equally abominable, both working to spread misery wherever they went, turning people away from the righteous path and towards a life of hedonism and self-destruction, because that's ultimately what darkness seeks, to drag you through feces and destroy your very soul, while you smile and ask for more. It is said witches fly towards their Black Sabbath on Friday nights, during the new moon when the skies are dark, only lit by the soft glow of distant stars on a branch of the Milky Way we can see, which when seen on moonless desert nights looks as if the night itself was a living being, exposing its backbone to us. These witches don't fly on a broomstick, as many people think European witches do. Oh no. These witches meet in caves deep in the mountains, in ravines and crevices where normal-sized people would have a hard time fitting in, where only children could maneuver their way around or get lost forever. Instead of broomsticks, these witches turn themselves into strange birds. Some say these birds look like very large crows or like black vultures, while others claim these strange creatures, which the Amerindians called Tuesday through Tuesday, are instead the very heads of the witches, which they detach from their bodies by means of dark craft, with a necromantic vest made of human skin, the skin of someone who loved them and whom they loved. A grotesque transformation was invoked. Ears turn into large black wings, and their veins and viscera hanging as it would on a decapitated head turn into birds' feet with sharp and strong talons, with which they can steal children whose parents were careless and look away, if only for a moment. But not all babies that were stolen ended up raped, eviscerated, and devoured, with their skin becoming soft leather or their fat being used for candles and chthonic rituals. The very lucky ones got to live a life of constant hell, becoming an imbunch, a twisted and deformed creature of pain and sorrow, with their hands and legs broken and then mended in unnatural contortions, in a way the human body was never meant to move. These monstrosities would become guardians at the entrance of the witches' cavern system. It is said that sometimes on moonless nights, you can hear the witches crying out as they fly by, a horrible scream of agony and joy. And when you hear them, you must say to them, "Fly by, devil bird. You are already late." Jesus Christ came by earlier, and he has already won the race. I have personally never seen or heard one of these devil birds, these witches. But my grandmother once told me the story of one of her family members, before she was born, who had a close encounter with these things, and the horror she endured haunted her for the rest of her life. This story is based on real events. My grandmother told me about her grandaunt, who once lived in the small town of Salamanca, a mining village of barely 12,000 people in present day, and perhaps only 1,000 people in the late 19th century when these events took place. Salamanca was in a semi-deserted area, with two rivers nearby that allowed some vegetation to grow. Back then, most people were poor and didn't have many options to make a living. If you were a woman, you found yourself a good husband who, hopefully, didn't beat you too harshly. And if you were a man, you found yourself a mining job risking your life every day in dark tunnels, only to earn barely enough to feed your family, and often dying before your time buried alive when one of those tunnels collapsed, or from lung cirrhosis after decades of breathing toxic substances. My grandmother's grandaunt was one of the lucky women who found herself a good husband, a hard-working man who didn't drink and didn't beat her, and only wanted to save enough from his work to one day own some land of his own, land he could leave to his children. He had been working since he was 12 years old. That was the way it was back then, when kids as young as 10 were forced to earn a living and help around the house, as feeding hungry bellies was more important than earning an education that could help better their lives. In spite of all the challenges, they were happy. They had met when they were both teenagers at church. Soon they were married, and they moved together to Salamanca so he could find work as a miner. They had hopes for the future, and within a short time of moving to their new home, she became pregnant with their first child. Pregnancy, and especially the time after childbirth, are the most dangerous moments for a woman and child when dealing with darkness and its minions. Witches grave the tender, soft flesh of a newborn baby, and they enjoy driving a fragile woman to madness and despair. But my grandmother's grandaunt held on to her faith, traditions, and superstitions. Even though she heard the bone-chilling cries of those devil birds on moonless nights, far off in the distance and getting closer, she knew what to say. And she always held on to her baby, knowing if she let go of him for an instant, the witches would have him for supper. Years went by of happy and simple life, a hard-working couple with faith for the future, living one day at a time. Their baby grew up soon, too old to be carried away by witches now. He was now 9 years old. Her womb desired to be a mother again, so they conceived another baby, this time a baby girl, and once again their house was filled with giggles and nursery songs. And once again they had to worry about devil birds, witches, and their sharp iron teeth, their blood-curdling screams, and not knowing if one day they'd close their eyes just for a second too long, and their baby would be gone forever. Their first son had grown up too fast. He was a smart boy who did well in school, with an inventive and curious mind. Just like every other kid of his age, it wouldn't be too much longer till he would have to abandon school and find work at a farm or in the copper mines. He wished it could be different, but that's just the way things were back then. My grandmother's grandaunt wished it would be different too. She wanted him to study and become a doctor or perhaps a priest, someone who did good for the world. With his newborn little sister at home, the boy felt like a big man already. He had no more time for thinking about childish games, even though he missed a time of careless existence. And now he missed his mother's hugs and kisses. She was looking away from him, looking to her newborn baby. He felt it, and he knew he was no longer her little baby anymore. One morning, before her husband woke up to go to work, she woke up to make breakfast for her family. She noticed the door on the back of their little adobe house was left open, and her heart sank to her stomach. Had someone come into their house? She went to check again on her little baby girl. She was safe and sound in her crib. Next, she went to check on her young boy, and his bed was empty. Had he run away? Or was he taken? It was a moonless night. Just a few minutes later, the boy came through the door before dawn, before his father would wake up. He had walked up to the river that crossed the valley of Salamanca, the only thing that allowed any vegetation to grow in this semi-desert area of the world. He had gone to swim in the pitch-black darkness and think about his future. She scolded her boy for being so careless, for leaving the door open like that, knowing fully well what superstitions say, and for going alone into the night, because even if witches thought him a bit stale for their taste, there were still plenty of bad people who wouldn't think twice of hurting a young kid wandering the streets at night. But she was happy he hadn't run away as she suspected. After being scolded, the boy replied, "Mom, I don't want to be a miner. I don't want to work on a farm. I want a better life," saying these words in a calm and gentle voice, barely above a whisper. His mom understood how he felt. She hugged and tried to comfort him. "What would you like to do instead?" she asked him, knowing their options were extremely limited. "I don't know. I want to study, perhaps travel and see the world. I want a chance for a better life. I'm sure I can think of something better than just staying here." For a moment, they held each other in silence. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you," she said, trying to show empathy, knowing fully well what his only real options were, hoping he'd come to his senses. Days went by, and with them also the phases of the moon. She didn't have to worry about devil birds for a little while, but she felt in her heart that her boy would truly run away soon, before he was even 10 years old. She told her husband her concerns, and together they decided it was time for him to talk some sense into their boy, show him the value of hard work, because sooner or later, at 10 or 16 years old, he'd have to learn it. My great-grandaunt's husband took his son to the mines with him to show him how being inside those tunnels and crevices wasn't so bad. "You're right, life in these tunnels isn't too bad," the boy said while coyly smiling, perhaps accepting his fate. Nearly a month went by, and things were normal. The family would be together for dinner, go to church together, living a life of normal and expected. But soon the moonless nights would return. It was the first night of a new moon, and they all went to bed early, leaving their candles on until they'd fall asleep, as if the soft golden glow of a single candle illuminating a cold room could hold back the vast darkness of the moonless night outside. Suddenly, appalling screams that sounded like the shrill cries of a baby or the desperate pleas of a dying man woke them up. The candles had gone out, and a misty, chill air floated through the house. The screams were getting closer and closer, and then sudden thuds loudly fell on the roof, breaking the shingles with loud cracks. Multiple petrifying, horrific screams came from the roof. She got out of bed, waking up her husband, both trembling with fear. The cradle with her little baby girl was next to them, and the little girl woke up as well, crying loudly as those things outside. She tried to light her candle, but it wouldn't light up. He tried as well, but it was as if that misty chill floating around them kept any fire, any light from igniting. Suddenly the screams were coming from inside the house, shrill and stupefying sounds only comparable to a nightmare. She picked up her baby, and her husband went in front of her, grabbing a hammer he kept nearby, naively thinking this could serve as defense in case those things got too close. They headed towards their son's bedroom, walking in the darkness, tripping over the little furniture they had, making their way towards their boy so they'd all be together. They made it to the boy's room, and he lay in bed awake. The family sat together on the bed, in pitch-black darkness, recognizing each other only by instinct and each other's body warmth and shape. The birds kept screaming, now walking inside of the house, getting closer and closer towards them. In total darkness, the family realized they were under siege. The room soon was filled with those devil birds, coming to take the little baby girl. The father got up and swung his hammer towards the sound of the devil birds, without thinking twice, only hoping wild action could give his family a fighting chance. And then she felt small hands taking away her baby. In just an instant, she couldn't even fight it. It was only a quick pull, and her treasured child was out of her arms. She couldn't see, only feel intense terror, imagining the future of her precious baby. From outside of the house, the parents heard a scream, this time not one of the devil birds, but one equally horrifying. It was their boy, screaming. He was being taken away. "Mother!" he screamed, as we all call for our mother when overwhelmed by fear. And suddenly, the house was empty except for the two parents. The devil birds were simply no longer there. They had vanished like a shadow, as silent and swiftly as an evil thought. They heard distant screams, once again, getting farther away every second. They were heading toward the mountains, towards the old tunnels and caves. They couldn't believe what just had happened. They just knew they had to get their kids back no matter the cost. The parents ran as fast as they could towards the mountains where the mines were, and where superstition said the caves of the witches were as well. They arrived at the feet of the mountain, the entrance to the tunnels, and in darkness they entered, holding each other's hand, hoping their love would protect them. They walked deeper and deeper into the tunnel, only following sounds of distant crying of children. Finally, they arrived into a chamber the hard-working miner didn't know existed in those tunnels. Torches lit up in a circle around them, and a tall man, wearing a black robe, faced away from them. They saw the man had their young boy by the throat, but there were no signs of their baby girl. "Let him go, or I swear to God I will mess you up," said the husband, always a tough man. He took steps forward towards the man in the black robe, but no matter how much he walked forward, he didn't move at all. My great-grand was paralyzed by fear, still standing on the threshold of the chamber, observing this terrible scene. Then the man in the black robe turned around to face them, his face obscured by the long hanging robe over his eyes, but they could see it was an old man with long bony hands and very white skin. "Let's make a deal," said the man in the black robe. "I'll let your boy go. In exchange for you," he said. The tough man, hard-working father, and husband didn't think it twice. He nodded and got closer to the man in the black robe, this time actually being able to move closer. "I'm here. Let go of my son now," said the father. "Come closer," said the man in the black robe. The father obeyed him, now face to face with the man in the black robe. The father tried to raise his hands and strangle the man in the black robe, but something prevented him from doing it. It's not that something held his hands back. Instead, it was as if his arms didn't respond to his commands at all. Then, the father felt a sharp pain on his chest. A ritual dagger was cutting him till its tip reached his backbone. The man in the black robe twisted the dagger, causing the father unbearable pain. At this moment of agony, the father noticed the low angle of the stab wound, and he closed his eyes and he opened them again, having a revelation more horrendous than the certain death that awaited him. There was no old man in the black robe. The one who had stabbed him was his son. The boy held on to the dagger, his father's blood dripping down his arm. The mother, still paralyzed by the threshold of the chamber, screamed and screamed till her throat was raw. "Why? Why? Why?" asked the father, as he felt life slipping away from him. "I want to fly," said the boy, opening his mouth and revealing sharp iron teeth, grinning widely in an unnatural way. So many teeth, so sharp, so big, they couldn't possibly fit in his mouth. The boy looked at his mother, standing on the back, and he said, "Mommy, I figured out what I want to do with my life." His mother looked at him with terror in her eyes, as he smeared his father's blood on himself, finally washing away his baptism, which he had first washed away in the river at night on a moonless night. The boy began to vomit, not food, but his own insides, his guts coming out of his mouth. The flesh around his neck detaching as torn flesh, his ears growing and turning into large black wings, his head turning into a monstrous bird, and his body falling to the floor, vanishing before touching the ground. The mother turned around and ran into the night, always crying and unable to contain her anguished screaming. Her son was no longer her boy, and her little baby girl was ripped from her arms. She found her way out of the tunnel and ran back to town, screaming for help. The next day, the people in town went looking for the missing baby girl, but after days of searching, they never found her. But they did find the skinned corpse of my great-grandaunt's husband. Many people believed her story, that witches had taken her children and killed her husband, while others thought she was crazy, and she must have killed her husband and drowned her children. She never told them what she had really seen and what had truly become of her son. Eventually, she left the town and moved to the capital city of Santiago de Chile. After years of solitude, still being an attractive woman, she remade her life and found a measure of happiness with a new husband, a kind and wealthy widower with children from his previous marriage. But still, my grandmother told me that her grandaunt dreamt about what had happened often for the rest of her life. And on moonless nights, when those wicked witches, devil birds, could be heard screaming in the distance, she heard them and could clearly hear a word in their screams. Perhaps she imagined it, but among the cacophony of screams, she could clearly hear one of the voices that shouted, "Mother!" Eighth story. I honestly just don't know what to say. I shared twice on here, but one of them was about a deer person or something out where my grandmother lives. I don't live there anymore and live 45 minutes away from her. Anyways, I took out my dog tonight. My dog was peeing, and I was on my phone. We live in an apartment complex with thick woods in the back. My dog started growling, which is weird because he never does. That when I looked over where he was, and I'm honestly shaking thinking about it, but with my physical eyes, I see this 6.5 or 7-foot deer thing. First thought was a Wendigo. It was thin and skinny with very wet fur. The deer skull. No eyes. It was staring right at us. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. I began to pull my dog, and I looked back as I stepped on a stick. I looked back, and it moved to the other side of the tree. I kind of yelled instinctively, you can't follow or harm me. Go back. It didn't move and dragged my dog into the house and shut the door. My wife asked why I slammed the door. I just told her the dog was being weird. She doesn't believe in that stuff. Anyways, I went back out a few minutes ago, which was an hour after it happened. No sign of it. I'm shaking while I'm writing. Hope to never see that shit again. Ninth story. Creepiest thing that's happened to me. So I live in a rural place and in a heavily wooded area. I've always felt totally safe in the woods, even at night. I used to go for night walks all the time. I'm not really a skeptic. I do believe in some paranormal things, though. I've never had an experience until this one. Regardless, I still always try to find the most logical explanation, and I don't often feel scared or unnerved by things. This experience, however, really freaked me out, and I've been thinking about it ever since it happened. So I thought I'd share. So this was a few weeks ago. My parents had gone to bed, but I wanted to stay up late, so I settled into the living room to read. Our living room has these giant windows almost covering the entire wall. I left the blinds open and turned on one lamp and sat right by the window. My elderly dog, who had been let out already to go to the bathroom for the night and was back inside, started pacing the house and barking and wouldn't settle down. This is unlike her. She's super old, so she usually goes right to bed, and she knows not to bark in a house like that. We let her out again, and she wanted right back in. We gave her some food, and still for about an hour, she kept pacing and barking. She wasn't even barking at the windows or looking outside. She just paced up and down the halls and barked at nothing in particular. This kind of weirds me out, but I just shrugged it off, and then she finally settled down to sleep in my parents' bedroom. About 20 minutes later, I am reading on the couch by the window with my cat when I hear an animal walking outside. I only hear it take a few steps. It sounded large, and I figured it was probably a deer. My cat jumps up and acts super interested in what's outside, pacing up and down the windowsill and peering out there. Then, after a few minutes, the screen of the window furthest from me across the room starts shaking violently, like something is shaking/banging on them really hard. Again, these windows span the whole wall. It startled me, and I looked over. I couldn't make anything out in the dark or see what was outside, and then the shaking/banging grew even more violent, and the windows next to me started shaking too. My cat freaked out and ran out of the room. At this point, I was really scared, and I did something you'll probably think is kind of silly. I literally closed my eyes and threw the blanket over my head and waited for it to stop. The shaking/banging lasted for several more seconds. I remember being taken aback at how much force seemed to be behind it. I just couldn't bring myself to look. I had an awful feeling, and I think if I looked and saw something horrible, it would really traumatize me. It finally stopped, and I stayed under the blanket for 2 entire hours before I could work up the nerve to get up and go to my bedroom. The next morning after I wake up, I've calmed down a lot and figured it was probably some kind of animal. I went outside to go look at that window to see if I could find tracks or something and look at the screens. What I found made my skin crawl. There was a single long diagonal slash in the window screen of the window I was sitting right next to. If you're standing in front of where the slash is and looking inside, the slash aligns right over the spot I was sitting. No tracks. So that's creepy AF. And what's weird to me is that if it were an animal, why weren't there more slashes? Just one single deliberate slash is strange. There were absolutely no scratch marks or slashes anywhere else on the screens or around the windows, just that one. The other screens were just pretty loose now. If it was a bird, I would have heard wings flapping. I feel like I would have heard animal sounds if it were any kind of animal. If it was a person, which is even scarier to me, I would think someone who would do something like this would have taken it further and probably would have done more to scare and intimidate than just shaking some windows and slashing one and then leaving just to scare me. Besides the shaking/banging, there were absolutely no other sounds. And since we live rurally, the chance that it was a person seems more unlikely. It freaks me out, but there's nothing I can really do about it other than put up trail cams. Nothing like this has ever happened to me the entire time I've lived here. A few nights before this happened, I actually started feeling some bad vibes from the woods at night. To be honest, like I said, I am normally very at ease with them, but I was out smoking a few nights before in my backyard and just felt like I was being watched and something was just making my skin crawl. And I've been avoiding going outside at night again, and then this happened. This experience really kind of freaked me out, but there's not much I could do except put up some cameras. Thanks for reading. Update. So something new happened. Ick if that many people read this post anymore since it's old, but I thought I'd share. So I was actually only home for Christmas break, and I hadn't put up cameras before leaving to go back to school in another city, even though I urged my parents to. I recently visited again, and they told me about something eerie that happened just after I left. Our backyard has regular wooden fences and a regular simple gate that has the common lift-up latch to open and close it. Something ripped off the bottom of the wooden planks of the fence, a section that was only a few feet from the gate. It was thick wood that has been fine for the decade-ish it's been there. It would take something with a lot of strength and articulation to rip off the planks in the violent manner they were. You could tell they were ripped off in a clean snap, not something slowly tearing them apart or something. The scratch marks were also bizarre. There were several scratches that were perfectly horizontal across the wood. What animal would make perfectly horizontal scratches against a vertical fence? And there was one set of puncture marks on one plank, like something sunk claws into it in and out one time. I'm thoroughly creeped out. Legitimate advice on how to seek someone to help me with dealing with something like this would be very appreciated. Please message me if you can help me or have any advice or know anybody. I'm actually very concerned now. Thanks a lot for watching this video till the end. Drop your suggestions in the comments section.